Hello everyone, Bashrop here, and in this video I'll go over all the frontier cooking recipe foods, explain how the bonuses work, and which recipes are worth making. When recipes first released in June 2023, none of them were renewable and they used up very limited ingredients. However, with the recent addition of the trader, and especially after the most recent patch that added potatoes, carrots and peaches as possible traits, most recipes are renewable, which affects recipe balance and makes them a lot more relevant. There's different reasons why one would bother making these more complex foods compared to just roasting some venison or munching on a kettle. Obviously there's calories and vitamin C, but when it comes to those, vast majority of recipe foods don't provide you with a significantly different amount compared to just eating the ingredients on their own. However, there are a few outliers, with pemmican bars, Breyer House pie and Rosehip pie being the biggest winners in terms of calorie gain, while Thompson family stew provides over 2000 calories less than just eating the ingredients on their own. And for vitamin C, the biggest outliers are pretty much the same. The pemmican bar is clearly worth making with the ingredients it costs, and Thompson family stew, well, it exists. But calories have become very plentiful in the game world in the last 2 years. With each new map, wildlife respawn timers matter less as there's more spawns, and with the addition of fishing tip-ups, dried meat, animal fat, the trader, improved beachcombing and I don't know what else, calories are very easy to come by, and vitamin C is less important as well now that we can just buy vitamin C pills from the trader. So what's the point of cooking more complicated foods just to fend off starvation when you can eat so many different things that take less effort to prepare? There is still a reason, and that reason is the unique bonuses many of the more complicated recipes provide that simple foods do not. In total, there's 6 unique buffs, with 3 providing instant benefit, the other 3 providing it over time. The instant bonuses are pretty straightforward. You receive an instant increase to your condition or fatigue from them. The cabin fever buff doesn't seem to have any effect though and is likely bugged. I tried multiple tests where I ate food that should affect cabin fever and where I didn't, and still got cabin fever at exactly the same time. Cabin fever isn't too bad to deal with anyway these days, but it would still be nice if we had another option. The overtime bonuses last a certain period of time and cannot be stacked while a bonus is already present. Eating more food that provides the same buff will just refresh the duration of the buff, even if it's 2 different foods, so you can have more than 10% maximum condition or 3 kilos of extra carrying capacity at the same time. The maximum condition bonus also instantly increases your current condition by the same amount, and this condition is capped once the buff is over, so it can be used for healing. The condition buffs are usually the most valuable ones, particularly on higher difficulties, as stims are not renewable on Interloper or Misery. And on Misery, maximum condition bonus is the only way to recover condition late game once you have the broken body affliction. There's no difference in potency of a buff between different recipes, with a few exceptions. Improved rest bonus from all recipes is only a mere 3-hour one, except Stalker Pie, which gives the full 6 hours, just like a green tea would. And 2 out of 3 soups, the Vagabond and the Last Resort soup, only provide 5% maximum condition gain instead of the standard 10% bonus from all other healing recipes. The condition healing recipes often confuse people. Besides the standard 10% max condition bonus and the lower 5% these 2 soups provide, there's also the instant 25% condition bonus, only provided by 2 recipes, and this one is a completely separate thing with a different icon. In fact, the Okurker's Pie actually gives both condition buffs, resulting in a massive 35% condition increase. Other than the previously mentioned exceptions, the only thing that affects the potency of a buff or its duration is the fraction of the food you ate. For example, if you're not hungry enough to eat the whole ranger stew, but only eat 60% of it, you only get 60% of the buff, and the other 40% will be applied when you finish what's left of it later. Eating just a fraction of some food also affects the duration of the bonus if the food provides benefits over time. This mechanic lets us use a trick to quickly heal with maximum condition boosting foods. Normally, if you eat, say, a vegabund soup and heal 10% condition, you'd have to wait 3 hours for the bonus to expire to heal another 10%, otherwise the second soup won't do anything besides giving you calories and making you more tired. But since the more recent food reapplies the bonus, and eating just a fraction provides a shorter bonus, you can just eat a small fraction of the second soup, which will shorten the max condition buff to only a couple in-game minutes, and after that expires, you can eat the remainder of the soup for another almost 10% condition. So the only thing stopping you from healing however much you want is the fact that you cannot overeat. This also means more calories on foods that provide bonuses is sometimes a bad thing. Since you cannot overeat most food, if you desperately need extra condition after a struggle, but you just ate 2 moose steaks earlier, well, you're out of luck, hopefully you have a stim. So for recipes where the primary draw to making them is the condition boost, the fewer calories the recipe has, the better, as it makes it easier to eat multiple portions in one go. It's worth noting that there are exceptions to the can't overeat food rule. All stackable foods, most of which are made from recipes that yield multiple portions, allow overeating, and this allows the player to get a full bonus regardless of their hunger level. Also, since you get the full bonus when you eat one full portion of food, recipes which yield more than one portion are significantly more efficient when it comes to bonuses. A good example is the peach pie and Breyer House pie. You need 0.2 kilos of flour to make either, but you get 3 peach pies and only 1 Breyer House pie. Both restore 15% fatigue when fully finished, meaning you get to restore 15% for eating the entire Breyer House pie, but an impressive 45% for eating all 3 peach pies. There is no stackable food that provides either of the condition buffs though, so if you're planning to carry some food for condition boost, something to consider is how much condition will you recover per calorie eaten, as that's what will limit how much you can recover quickly. Some foods don't just apply bonuses, but also apply penalties. There's a penalty variant to fatigue, carry weight, and stamina, in addition to some recipes applying the headache affliction, which mostly does nothing anyway. When gauging usefulness of a recipe, it's important to consider not only the provided benefits, but also availability of the ingredients. Most recipe foods are infinitely renewable these days, but recipes that require natural resources, such as rosehips or radishes, are finite, and on very long runs, you may not be able to make them anymore. Recipes that call for acorns or burdock are even worse, as those are not only non-renewable, but also quite rare and not sustainable even on shorter runs. Now, let's get to the tier list. Tier lists are always somewhat subjective, so I'm sure some might disagree with certain items being too low or too high, but I'll try to explain why each recipe is where it is. Quite often I'll place some recipes quite low because they are not renewable, which is a significant drawback. I will be looking at this from a perspective of a long survival run on Interloper, which might affect the placement a bit. Feel free to let me know in the comments if your opinion is different though. We'll start from the lowest tier. These foods don't really have any use or redeeming quality currently. Acorn bannock and pancakes, simply because acorns are so rare, you can't even make many of these. When it comes to acorns, you have a few options. You can just boil acorns and eat them for some calories, make acorn coffee, or use them in one of the recipe foods. With the few acorn spawns that exist in the game, you probably want either the coffee or some of the recipes which at least heal you. Still, Lily's pancakes, which does heal you and requires acorns, will only be a tier above, because there are still many much better healing recipes anyway that don't require acorns, so it's quite replaceable, but definitely a step up over the bannocks and pancakes. Besides these three, there's also Stalker Pie, which has pretty bland bonuses and lowers your carry weight when eaten. This one goes to the bottom tier as well, it's quite unappealing. And we'll stay in the bottom tier for a bit more because we're going to talk about Thompson Family Stew. This thing is a meme by now, it's been consistently the worst recipe ever since they released. It causes rashes, so it's still not renewable these days, but even back when none of the recipes were renewable, these recipes just stood out as hilariously bad. You're losing both vitamin C and calories by just making this, and it has some of the worst bonuses. Stamina, which is mostly just nice to have, but wait, you also lose fatigue at the same time as gaining stamina, which kind of doesn't make any sense. That's it for F tier food, and I think the reasons are quite obvious. Acorns are rare, and Thompson stew freaking sucks. Now, let's briefly talk about the most basic recipes, the kind you can make at early levels that don't require anything too special, but their usefulness varies quite a bit. The basic porridge is more useful than it might seem. It's cheap to make, available from cooking level 1, gives you some calories, nothing too fancy. What makes it actually good is simply how cheap and easy to make it is while still providing a warm-up. You can carry 8 warm-ups at the same weight as a whole broth. It unfortunately cannot be reheated. If it could, it would probably be a tier higher, but only soups, broth and stews can be reheated, while porridge and pies are only hot while fresh, and everything else never provides heat. Broth and soups are the best in terms of warm-ups, as they can not only be reheated but also stored in flasks. I'll get to soups later, but broth is only placed in the same tier as porridge because you can't use them for warm-ups very often anyway, as they're pretty useful ingredients to many other great recipes, and ptarmigans respond quite slowly, especially on higher difficulties. If you want to use a lot of warm-ups, porridge is the way to go, as you can obtain hundreds of portions with ease the moment Trader becomes available. It's worth mentioning that all recipe food cools down slower than these do, losing only 1.75% heat per minute outside and 0.5% inside. Sadly, this does not stack with flasks, as they just have their own values instead of modifying the values of whatever you put in. If they stacked together, it would have been possible to keep a broth or soup warm overnight when stored in flasks inside. But since they don't, this doesn't really affect recipe usefulness. Cooking oil and bannock are in the neutral C tier. Bannock is simple to make, but doesn't provide much other than calories. Still, bannock is also the only food in the game which you're allowed to make without any tools such as pots, cans or skillets. This can be pretty handy if you tend to forget them behind. You can also do this with acorn bannocks of course, but we don't talk about those. Cooking oil is just an ingredient and you're never gonna be too low on it, as animal fat is very plentiful anyway and it's super cheap to purchase from the trader, but there's not many other ways to spend animal fat. And there's still some use to making this early on to level up your cooking faster. Pancakes, however, will be one more tier below even these. They're not that bad, but they're definitely worse than the other basic recipes. They're harder to make, they don't give you even a warming up buff, and require a skillet to make. The only redeeming quality they have is their incredibly low cooking time. They might have some sort of niche use for that alone. If you have a bunch of ingredients sitting around, you could make a stockpile of calories with these much faster than cooking meat or most other recipes, but that's a big if. This lower tier will also have all the basic stews. Just like pancakes, they're harder to make than the other basic recipes. Their bonus is minuscule, comparable to a half of a cup of green tea, while also tiring you out. They can be warmed up repeatedly, which is nice, but they cost broth, which can really just do the same anyway. Actually, I'm going to single out the ptarmigan stew as worse than the rest, since ptarmigan meat will often be the bottleneck when you're trying to cook a bunch of different recipes. For the most part, you'll want to use ptarmigan meat to make broth, and then make recipes requiring broth, so recipes that cost ptarmigan meat are usually not so great, particularly when they have alternatives, and there's pretty much no difference between a rabbit and a ptarmigan stew. except one meat type is more valuable than the other. And I'll do the same with pies, and place the ptarmigan pie lower than the other basic meat pies. But pies are quite a bit more useful than the stews, so they mostly belong to B tier as they're an easy source of some extra carry weight, which can be a very nice bonus, especially since the travois has been buggy lately, so not everyone wants to use it if it might just disappear at any point. Coastal fish cakes are sort of a special version of meat pies. They grant bonus stamina in addition to carry weight, and actually are the only renewable recipe with a stamina bonus. The cabin fever buff doesn't do anything, but maybe one day it might. Either way, fish cakes are easily S tier even without it. And the fruit pies are even better than most meat pies, with their instant fatigue increase and absolutely no scent. One recipe yields 3 portions, which recovers 45% of your fatigue meter. And since they're stackable, you can overeat if you're really only after the fatigue recovery. This is our second S tier food. We're talking about peach pies here, to be specific. Since canned peaches are now renewable, these pies are also fully renewable. Rosehip pies used to be the better one, and the main use for rosehips, since peaches were way too rare for how often they were used in recipes. But now that we have renewable peaches and other ways to spend rosehips, the glory days of rosehip pies are over and they fell down all the way to tier E. There's still some use for them very early on, before you get to trade for caffeine pills or peaches to make pies, especially since rosehips are plentiful, but non-renewability paired with several very viable alternatives make them not too great anymore. Speaking of better alternatives for rosehips, besides rosehip pies, they can be used in camberflight porridge and pemmican bars, in addition to being simply used as a medicinal tea or a currency for the trader. So while they're plentiful, you really need to think what to use them on. The teas are not a very good option anymore. You can get warm-ups or vitamin C from so many other sources. They are the most effective plant currency for the trader, but that can be replaced with birch bark and old man beards. Rosehip pies can be replaced with peach pies, and camberflight porridge can be replaced with many other healing recipes that don't require a non-renewable ingredient, which means they're going to the same tier as Lily's pancakes. That leaves us with pemmican bars, which are an amazing recipe. I'd drag these to S tier and just be done with it. Huge caloric and vitamin C gain when cooked. They no longer have scent, even though they did on release. They are stackable, which means they can be overeaten just like fruit or meat pies. And the bonus they provide is amazing. Bonus carry weight, stamina and fatigue, no downsides. They're basically fruit pies combined with fish cakes with no scent. Sadly, you are going to run out of rosehips at some point once again and can't make any longer. Just for that alone, they have to go a tier lower, but no other non-renewable recipe will be anywhere this high in the list, that's for sure. Once you run out of rosehips on long runs, pemmicans can be replaced entirely with a combination of other S tier foods, the fish cakes and the peach pies, or you can just use fish cakes and caffeine pills. The only downside is the scent from fish cakes. And the last non-renewable recipe is the prepper's pie. This is the single most expensive recipe to make, costing not only precious acorns and 2 burdock roots, but also 4 radishes. This is the only recipe that mostly consists of just non-renewable stuff. However, it is still a very good recipe. Another one that would be in S tier if all ingredients were renewable, but unlike with pemmicans, most of prepper's pie ingredients are actually rare. While you can theoretically make thousands of pemmican bars in a single run, you are likely limited to a double-digit amount of prepper's pies, even if you spend every single burdock and acorn you find on making them. They might still be worth making if you get the ingredients though, as prepper's pie is the most efficient healing recipe in the game, and since it provides only the instant 25% condition boost, and not the maximum condition boost like most other recipes, you don't even need to do the duration bypass trick and can just eat them straight. Making these renewable would probably be too strong anyway. This way, prepper spy still makes it to B tier, even with its exorbitant cost. And all that remains is dockworker spy, ranger stew, brayer house spy, and all three soups. All of these mostly serve the same purpose, healing. None of them is as efficient as prepper spy, but all of them are fully renewable, which makes them quite good. Dockworker spy was always an interesting recipe, as it heals an insane 35% condition, because it provides both the instant condition boost and the maximum condition boost. But it was always one of the costliest recipes, requiring 2 potatoes and rockfish, which are not easy to catch. But since potatoes are now available for a quite reasonable price, this can be made and enjoyed much more often. Rockfish still take a while to catch, so it might be a good idea to supplement the healing with other recipes. It's also smelly and cannot be reheated, as it's a pie, even though it looks more like porridge. So these usually make the most sense to cook and maybe leave behind in a base for later, unless you know you'll be taking condition damage that day. But out of all the healing recipes, Dockworker Spy heals the most condition by far, and is easily one of the strongest recipes in the game, balanced only by rockfish rarity and cost of potatoes. Vagabond Soup was secretly the best recipe back when it released along with the Trader. The original version of this recipe only lasted around a week before it got patched out, but oh boy was it good. It only provided 250 calories instead of the current 687.5, making it roughly as efficient as the mighty Prepper Spy, which is not renewable and incredibly expensive. Meanwhile, Vagabond Soup costs half a rabbit, half a broth, and a sprinkle of salt. It also only used to weigh 0.10 kilos, like a tea does, and used to not have any scent, despite containing meat. Maybe it's a good thing that it got nerfed. I used to spam it and just wrestle cougars in the first week, instead of avoiding their attacks like a normal person. Those days are long gone, but Vagabond Soup is still amazing, and even after all the nerfs, it's the most efficient heal other than the 2 recipes that provide the instant condition boost, and easily the cheapest healing recipe out there. All of the soups also make you more tired, which can be quite annoying if you're still trying to move around, but these days it's easily offset with the other recipes or caffeine pills, and sometimes it can even be an advantage, as it means you can sleep more and thus heal even more condition. The scent is a downside, but remember all soups can be put in a flask, which will mask their scent. This won't work if the soup is old and 0% condition, since the flask acts as a container and will despawn your soup if you attempt to put it in, so they're best used quickly. You can always carry some broth and salt to make them when needed though, as rabbits are found just about everywhere anyway. And if you need a healing recipe that does not have any scent and isn't too hard to make, then Last Resort Soup might be the best of the 3. This one used to be probably the worst recipe in the game, maybe except Thompson's, back when potatoes were the rarest ingredient, but now that they're not, this is a very cheap way to heal up and doesn't require you to carry any scent. It's still a bit harder to make in large amounts than Vagabond Soup and provides more calories, making it less efficient for healing large amounts of condition, but that's a fair trade-off for the lack of scent. In fact, Last Resort Soup is the only renewable healing recipe that doesn't smell, which sets it apart from all the other ones, as it's a really nice emergency food to carry, and for that reason belongs to S tier. It's worth noting here that most of these healing recipes are still less effective than the good old birch bark tea, whether we're talking about calories, weight, or effort to make. But remember that they stack. While birch bark will heal you over time, you can also use healing recipes to get to high condition faster. Still, whenever you need to recover a little bit of condition, drinking birch should be your first step, and only use the recipe foods if you need to heal even more. The last soup is a little less appealing from healing perspective. Porter soup contains 50% more calories than Last Resort Soup, and more than double compared to Vagabond Soup, while still having scent and being the costliest, not only requiring ptarmigan meat, which is always valuable, but also 6 cattails, which are only renewable via beachcombing, and it does take quite a while to find 6 of them. Porter soup is the only soup that heals 10% condition instead of 5, but even that doesn't really give it any real advantage, as it also costs twice as much ptarmigan meat as the other soups, and ptarmigan meat, while renewable, is typically the bottleneck when making large amounts of recipe food. It's still a renewable healing food though, and it is the best at one thing, just not related to healing. It is the only recipe providing a carry weight buff that's both renewable and scent free, at least sort of. The soup does smell, but you can always hide it in a flask. So, despite the higher cost, I'd still place it in A tier. Breyer House Pie is a good jack-of-all-trades recipe. While it is the least efficient heal in terms of calories, it provides extra energy instead of draining it like most other renewable heals. It's also one of the best foods in terms of calories per weight in the entire game, and also twice as efficient as the soups in terms of condition gain per kilo of ptarmigan meat. If you want to heal, this probably shouldn't be your first pick, but it's quite nice as a general purpose food. Just remember, it does have scent since it contains meat. Solid A in my book though. And the final recipe is the Ranger Stew. Another A tier heal, as efficient as Breyer House Pie in terms of ptarmigan meat, and possibly more if we're counting the improved rest heal as well. And unlike the pie, it can also be reheated. The downside is the scent that cannot be hidden in a flask like the soups can, and also a somewhat higher cost, but the improved rest buff does make it a nice dinner food to eat just before sleeping. Alright, that's all the recipes. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching.